Now to the latest developments in the Middle East. Another US service member has died days after being injured in an attack on US troops in Saudi Arabia. Live to Mimi Becker in Tel Aviv. Mimi, 7 US service personnel have now been killed.
Jane, they have, and the US have just made this announcement confirming that that service member has passed away from injuries that occurred in the initial attacks when these strikes started more than 8 days ago. It's understood he was serving, or they were serving, in Saudi Arabia. We have had an update from the IDF this evening saying that this war could go on for a long time and that the Iranian army is not safe anywhere in the Middle East. It comes after Israel has specifically targeted infrastructure, oil refinery and depots in Tehran and its surrounds. Huge plumes of smoke and explosions there last night that, of course, have carried on into today as well. Israel is also continuing its battle with Hezbollah, and Lebanese officials have revealed they estimate more than 500,000 people have now been displaced because of this war. It comes as Iran still fights back to Israel with reports they're using cluster-head bombs that effectively break up into smaller mini bombs and cause significant shrapnel damage because they are a lot harder to intercept. And we've seen that today with 6 people injured across multiple locations.
We're used to it already. We live, that's a way of life. We know how to manage everything. We know how to keep everything calm.
Now, the UK has successfully destroyed an Iranian drone that was reportedly headed for Iraq, while we've heard that French President Emmanuel Macron has spoken to the Iranian president, telling him to stop striking with others in the Middle East. Jane?
Mimi, thank you. Protesters have descended on the Iranian women's soccer team bus in support after their silent protest during the Women's Asian Cup. Live to Amanda Kopp in Canberra. Amanda, calls for their protection are growing louder.
Yeah, they are, Jane, but it may not be that simple. For many of these women, seeking asylum here isn't an option because their families are reportedly under threat back in Iran. That's after they were shown not singing their national anthem at one of these football matches, and they're now facing death threats or jail time. Protesters are calling for the Australian government to help.
But we've seen videos of them showing this sign as for requesting help. We need the police to have a safe conversation with this girl, tell them what rights they have and tell them their options. If they want to stay here, we must help them.
Now, further on the Middle East situation, though, Jane, the government has issued a do not travel alert for the United Arab Emirates and Dubai. Foreign Minister Penny Wong issuing a statement saying that the government has told their officials in the UAE to evacuate any dependents who might be with them due to the deteriorating security situation in the region. Jane?
Amanda, thank you.
Well, Iran's president is this morning vowing the nation will not bow to pressure from US and Israel. To discuss, I'm joined by Foreign Affairs analyst Jasmine El-Gamal in London. Jasmine, thanks for your time. So 9 days since this conflict began, the fighting's only escalated, as we've seen. Iran says it can sustain 6 months of war, but with so many resources destroyed and depleted, how realistic is that?
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for having me. It is true that we're now entering a real escalatory period in the war, and I think the coming week will give us a much better idea of how each side is able to sustain and how much longer they'll be able to sustain their operations. You're absolutely right that Iran is using up a lot of its own missiles and drones and supplies, but so is the US. And the Gulf allies in the meantime in the region are getting hit really hard. Yeah. Critical infrastructure is now being targeted and they can't afford this much longer. So this coming week, I think, is a real important measure, I think, in terms of where we're going to go next.
Well, the targeting of those fuel and oil supplies in Iran by the US and Israel, what impact does that have immediately? I mean, obviously the civilians there will be impacted on a daily basis, but does that go some way to sort of degrading, I suppose, the Revolutionary Guard's forces?
Well, you know, I'm glad that you asked that because obviously, you know, you're looking at the images right now on the screen. I mean, absolutely horrifying, must be traumatizing and really frightening for the Iranian people. Health-wise, it's also obviously causing deep distress. There were warnings about not going out in the rain today in case there were chemicals, and people were being warned by the Iranian Red Crescent Society to throw away clothes that had been touched by rain. But this is also an important point I want to make, is that this isn't just targeting the IRGC and the regime, but these are Iranian resources that in a future government should be able to be used for the Iranian people. And that's really what's so disturbing about this.
Yeah. You know, you touched on the Gulf region as well. We're seeing Iran's proxies targeted, Israel's heavy bombardment of Hezbollah in Lebanon, forcing residents in Beirut to flee. Iran, in retaliation, is lashing out at those neighbours you mentioned, you know, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's just utter chaos there. Is there any strategy here? I suppose Iran's just really reacting at the moment.
It's definitely reacting. It's fighting for its very survival. So you can imagine that it's not going to go down without a fight. I think it is surprising how much damage they've been able to do for a consistent period of time. And we know that if the more squeezed they feel, the more damage they're going to try to inflict. I do want to say that in Lebanon specifically, it's not just Hezbollah that's being targeted by Israel. It's the Lebanese people. The entire south of Lebanon is being evacuated, and people are forced to flee and not knowing where they're going or when they're going to come back. So highly destabilizing period. Like I said, the next week is going to be critical, and also for oil prices that are expected to spike heavily in the coming hours and days.
I've spoken to friends of mine who have origins to Lebanon, and they are just absolutely, their family and friends who still live there are absolutely exhausted. I mean, they're used to living day to day there, but what's happening right now, they almost have no hope left, and that's the worst part about any kind of conflict of this nature. Jasmine, just before we let you go, we know that the Iran's Assembly of Experts has reportedly chosen the Supreme Leader's son as his successor. You know, for a few days now, he's being touted as a more hardline figure than his father was, which is, of course, a frightening prospect. But I suppose there's also the question about how long he even lasts in that role.
That's a great point. I mean, Israel has already stated that anyone who is even thinking about taking up that mantle should be prepared for being a target. You know, in terms of him being hardline, even if he wasn't as hardline as his father before, he's just had his father assassinated, and reports of other family members too, although I haven't seen concrete reports on exactly how many family members he's lost. It goes back to your question about the off-ramp here. Where is that off-ramp, and how do we get out of this situation? And I think from speaking to people in the region today, they're really putting a lot of hope on Donald Trump, you know, waking up and saying, you know what? I've done enough damage. I've degraded them significantly. I'm going to stop it here, and I'm going to put them on warning. If they try anything in the future, I will be right back doing it again. And that's what people are hoping for from the US president. Yeah,
it's also very unpredictable. That end game just keeps changing. Jasmine, thanks so much for your insight.
We have breaking news now in the Middle East. Iran has announced the next supreme leader of the country. Live to Lauren Tamazi in Washington, DC. Lauren, what more can you tell us?
Jane, this has just been announced by Iranian state TV that Mojtaba Khamenei, the second son of the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has now been announced as the next supreme leader of Iran by Iran's Assembly of Experts. He's a 56-year-old son of the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed at his compound last week by US and Israeli strikes. And we know that Khamenei has never held public office before. He's known to be very close to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. He was actually sanctioned by the United States in 2019. Now, this news has just come in, so there hasn't been any reaction from the US president just yet. But just days ago, Donald Trump has said that the Ayatollah's son would be unacceptable to him. We know that the US president says that he wants a hand in picking the next leader of Iran. So this morning, even the US president saying any new leader who is not up to his standard is not going to last long. So we are now watching for reaction out of the White House. But that news just coming in, Jane, from Iranian state TV, that Mojtaba Khamenei, the second son of the late Ayatollah, has now been announced as the new supreme leader of Iran.
Lauren, thank you.
Well, Penny Wong has delivered a bit of criticism for the United Nations, saying this war would not be necessary had the UN actually held Iran to account. Joining us to discuss today's headlines is Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister Ted O'Brien and Independent MP Allegra Spender. Good morning to you both. Ted, do you agree with Penny?
I think there's no doubt that the United Nations is sick and needs a serious health check. And I do believe that that it has been ineffective in several regards, including ensuring that Iran doesn't continue to export terror and also prevent it from building a nuclear weapon. I think this goes to another reason why Australia needs to stand very firmly in support of the United States and Israel with their efforts, Sarah.
Well, is that despite them perhaps being a bit, I guess, murky when it comes to the rules? I mean, your leader, Angus Taylor, has said that the rules-based international order has been exposed as wishful thinking of a bygone and benign era. What exactly does that mean? Is he suggesting just throwing out the rule books and making it up as we go?
No, I think the point he's making is a very practical one, and that is that we are seeing a fraying of what people refer to as a rules-based liberal order, where countries don't always follow the rules. They ultimately do what's in their own best interest.
But that's why they're undemocratic, despotic nations, unlike us.
And if you look... it's the reason why you have international institutions such as the United Nations. But when the United Nations are ineffective, of course, it does lead to countries making their own decisions outside of what otherwise would be a clear set of rules. I think it's a statement of practicality. It's a statement of the real world. And for anybody to suggest otherwise just wouldn't be realistic, and therefore would be quite dangerous if you're speaking on behalf of the country.
I mean, I get it. I understand what he's saying. I just don't know the validity of it and whether it's actually that practical, as you say it is. Allegra, what do you think?
So I think that this is a time where great powers are asserting themselves in a way that is, at times not consistent with the sort of historical rules-based order. But there have always been limitations, and I think some of those limitations of the UN and other institutions, I think, are clearer to us now than they have been in the past. In terms of what we do about it is, I do think we have to, continue to invest in international institutions like the UN and others, but we also need to invest in other relationships and building, I think, alliances and sort of strength through other types of, multilateral, groupings and other things. I think this is certainly what Mike Carney was speaking about last week in Parliament, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. The UN is imperfect; it has very significant limitations, but you don't just throw it out altogether. You also work pragmatically with others.
It's about how you form a structure that doesn't lead to chaos, right? But Ted, Senator Wong also confirmed that Australia has been asked to send Air Force assets to the Gulf, declined to say where that request came from. But it would at this stage be defensive rather than offensive action, still putting our Air Force officers obviously in the line of fire. Would you support this?
Indeed, from what the Foreign Minister has said, it would be a defence... Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Allegra.
Sorry, sorry, I wasn't sure who the question was. I was just going to say, we'd really, these are Australian lives. We should always be incredibly cautious about deploying Australian lives, and you'd have to see the justification for this. So we just don't know the information yet, but definitely considering, defensive as opposed to offensive action, but you need to see justification for any deployment of Australian troops. Apologies, Ted, you and I are jumping over each other.
Ted, would you agree with it? Would you support it?
Look, anything that is in our national interest, I can't see the government not having bipartisan support. From what the Foreign Minister has said, it is for a defensive posture. We've called for a briefing and we'll have more to say after that.
As the war in the Middle East escalates, Aussies are turning to social media to express their concern over fuel supply.
So just how concerned should we be? Let's bring in supply chain expert David Leaney live from Canberra. David, thanks for your time this morning. So our farmers in particular heavily rely on our fuel reserves, which then impacts food supply. How much does Australia actually have? How badly impacted will they be?
Yeah, morning, Sarah and Carl. Good to speak to you again. The problem with Australia's fuel supply is we generally only have about 4 or 5 weeks of fuel ever. It's just one of those things. You've got the stats there on the numbers. Actually, it's probably the ones from the minister. I'd say our diesel fuel is actually probably lower than that. Yeah. I'd probably put around 30 days worth of supply. The vast majority of Australia's fuel comes in, shipped in via Singapore. Made much worse at the moment because getting fuel from the north of Australia down to the regional areas in particular is really bad because of flooding, and the wet is really impacting, and so some communities are getting very short.
It's appalling to me that we don't have more of a supply than that, a country like this that's so reliant upon it. But maybe that debate for another day while we get through these prices. I've literally got a million messages on my social media from people. There's a bunch of farmers. First of all, we handled this with the diesel price and the diesel supply. Literally people being told, we've run out of diesel. This is rural suppliers, diesel and ULP this afternoon. We're expecting on Monday, but we don't know when it'll arrive. We'll give you some updates. Lightning Ridge out of diesel on the weekend. Shell has rationing. Ampol has fuel, but their price has skyrocketed. The messages go on and on and on. So that diesel supply will have a heavy impact in regional areas.
It will, and that passes on because just about everything we do in terms of supplies, groceries, it's the vast majority of it is delivered by diesel-powered semi-trailers. And so when you think of the price of fuel going up so high, that gets passed on from the price of everything from bread to bananas.
The issue as well, I guess, that's impacting consumers, aside from, you know, the bananas, as you mentioned there, is their day-to-day living, right? I mean, there are so many across the country now who are panic buying because they're not sure what's going to happen. So realistically, how much fuel do they have? I mean, should we be panic buying? Should we be stockpiling? Or can we be a bit more patient?
Definitely panic buying is only going to make the problem worse. So people should not panic buy. There will be rationing in some areas, and that's the market adjusting to these conditions. Also, this is going to last for quite a while. So panic buying this week isn't going to solve the problem because you're still going to have the problem the next week and the next week and the next week. We're actually got a couple of months ahead of this sort of problem.
Literally in a street anywhere in this country, diesel can go from $1.80 to $2.20, depending on what service station. Can you explain that? There must be some logical reason for that price discrepancy.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. I filled up last night, and I wish I could have got it for $2.20. That would have been good. Canberra tends to have quite expensive fuel prices, despite the fact that it's on quite a high transport route. Main reason for that is actually supply and demand. The retailers will charge the price that they can get, and the different fuel supply.
What you're saying is gouging.
Why aren't they getting held to account for that?
Yeah, I actually I would echo the comments that's been made recently about the ACCC needing to step in while the war in Iran is going on, because those prices are going up very sharply. Just as a rule of thumb, every $10 per barrel in US dollars that the price of oil goes up, the price of fuel in Australia goes up about 10 cents a litre. So when the price of the crude oil went up 30 cents last week, or $30 in the per barrel price, that means a 30 cent per litre increase in Australia straight away.
What's the point of a watchdog if they're not actually going to do anything? I mean, it's just hopeless. All right.
Leave that for us to analyse.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.